For a record 6 years now, Squarespace has been helping me turn my dream into reality, and that's what Squarespace does for millions of other people too. Their industry-leading website creation tools help millions of people start new careers, build new businesses, or just get things done. They're offering a special discount to viewers of this channel, so stick around to the end of the video to learn more. The very first moment you boot up Hell Is Us, a screen flashes up that reads, quote, "Warning, our game has no map, no markers indicating where people or things are or who to talk to. We will never tell you precisely what must be done or how to do it. To thrive in Hell Is Us, you will need to pay attention to your environments, listen, and be vigilant," end quote. As soon as I read this, I was like, oh baby, I'm so locked in, let's go. I'll tell you right off the top that Hell Is Us is a good first entry in what could one day be a really fantastic franchise. Now to be clear, neither developer Rogue Factor or publisher Nacon have announced any sequel plans for Hell Is Us, and hey, if it bombs, I don't expect it will get a sequel. But I desperately hope it doesn't bomb, because this is a good video game that I recommend, it delivers in many critical aspects, and I enjoyed my 25 hours with it, and I'm actually low-key blown away by just how good this is, given that it kind of came out of nowhere. But it does feel like a prototype for a much grander ambition that might one day be realized. And I really hope that Rogue Factor goes on to get the time, resources, and scope to realize that ambition. Believe it or not, Hell Is Us is actually a pretty fascinating game because it's a sort of semi-open world experience that I've been crying out for some time now. Hell Is Us exists as a direct response to the hand-holdy open world formula that has dominated the past two console generations. Yes, it has an edgy, grimdark setting. Yes, it has slow, souls-adjacent, stamina-based combat. Yes, it has NPCs you can chat to and quests to complete and items to upgrade and all the stuff you've come to expect from modern games. But it's what Hell Is Us doesn't have that defines it. The warning label wasn't lying. It doesn't have a map you can open at any time to see where you are. It doesn't have any mini-maps to help orient you in towns or dungeons. It doesn't have a traditional quest log that tells you what to do next. It doesn't have any map markers or GPS pointers guiding you towards a destination. It doesn't have a protagonist talking to himself while he solves puzzles, spoon-feeding you a solution that you didn't ask for. Aloy. The absence of these things immediately makes this so much more interesting and so much more engaging than a lot of other open world games you've played. When you actually need to pay attention instead of just following a GPS marker and putting the round peg in the round hole, incredible things happen to your brain. Hell Is Us is actually a fairly basic package when you really break it down into its components, but even in its simplicity, it does expose how creatively bankrupt so many of those hand-holdy open world design tropes are. So compelling is that you're on your own pitch that it goes a great distance to help you look past Hell Is Us's many shortcomings, because yeah, there's a lot of them. The story is leveraged too deeply into esoteric, uninteresting lore, the combat is visually flashy but ultimately shallow and utterly crippled by a lack of enemy variety. Environment and puzzle design starts out strong, but wears out its welcome once the rhythm of the game has been established, and different variations of key finding and symbol matching start to feel played out. If I was to really summarize everything wrong with Hell Is Us, I'd put it this way. There's a fantastic 10 to 15 hours here where everything from locations to enemies to puzzles all feel new and different. But there's another 10 or 15 hours after that where you've absolutely seen and done it all before, and the impact of those opening hours is diluted as you settle into very familiar repetitive loops. Some will walk away from Hell Is Us fixated on those last 10 to 15 hours, while others will fondly remember the first. I fall into that latter category. There's plenty to complain about here, but I definitely think that the good outweighs the bad, and I think that as a AA game, this is exactly what I'm hoping for from this segment. Ballsy games that buck ubiquitous design trends and that have the courage to try something different, even if the landing isn't perfect.
No one is allowed in or out of Jova. Go back to the town.
How did you get into Hadia? The yellow brick road.
I want my mom and dad to tell me everything will be okay.
You have no idea who you've stolen from. Choose your next move wisely.
Okay, so to start, let's be really clear on what Hell Is Us is. Hell Is Us is a semi-open world third-person action-adventure game with a little bit of RPG and a hell of a lot of puzzle solving. It's not a Souls-like, though its combat feels a little Souls-esque with its pacing, stamina management, and enemy tuning. It does see you interrogating a fairly vast cast of NPCs as you look for clues and probe for more information about the world around you, but it's not a game where dialogue choices matter. It has a small number of towns populated by NPCs, but none of them move around or do anything. There's no law and order system, no ability to kill NPCs, etc. Like I said, it's an action-adventure game with some very light RPG elements. It is definitely not an RPG. But Hell Is Us is a very surprising game for many reasons, and one of them is certainly this game's setting and story. You play as Remy, who sits in an interrogation room being drugged and questioned by whatever the fuck this dude is. It's character design and voice acting that presages one of the game's best qualities, some really strong voice work led by the game's leading man, played by Adam Jensen himself, Elias Tufexis.
How did you get into Hadia?
I asked for a transfer to the UN peacekeepers, who had deployed inside Hadia.
It backfired.
This opening exchange and this other really flashy cutscene at the start of the game both hint at an experience that puts high production storytelling front and center, but Hell Is Us doesn't really deliver on that promise. This cutscene is by far and away the most exhilarating cutscene of the entire game, and you can tell that they really front-loaded their budget on this one to draw people in. After that, most of the cutscenes are simple dialogue exchanges inside an APC that you drive from place to place. The mystery of this interrogation sequence also falls fairly flat, as it's less about an interesting resolution and more about a convenient pretext to bring you back from the dead when you die.
Obviously, you didn't die. Concentrate, start over.
Hell Is Us is a little odd in the story choices that it makes and how it chooses to deliver them. The premise is a lot grittier than most games dare to be. It's set during a civil war between two fictional peoples, and one of the sides is winning bigly. One of the early moments of the game sees you pull up to a literal mass grave where a father wails in agony as he nurses the corpse of his dead wife and child. It's a lot, and it's really just a taste of what's to come, as the game paints a grim picture of a land riven by bloody, one-sided conflict that sees scores of innocents brutally slain.
Oh, my baby. Anna, my baby girl.
The game isn't just using all of this brutality as set dressing though. The horrors of civil war are a central theme that's explored again and again in the lore scraps you find, in the conversations you have with NPCs, in the environments you explore. Rogue Factor are fully committed to this grim anguish setting, and while that can sometimes make for some uncomfortable and confronting scenarios where you wonder if maybe they've taken things a little too far, it does speak to a fearlessness that's often missing from games when they handle sensitive subjects. Where the storytelling becomes a lot more awkward is in the metaphysical genesis of this conflict. It's honestly a little hard to wrap your head around, but imagine if all of these demons prowling around the world are sort of like physical manifestations of the misdeeds and cruelty of human beings, and sitting over and above that are a number of dark deities who scheme to reduce the world to a constant state of chaos. It's an interesting idea, but it's a little awkward to see this very real and often very harrowing depiction of civil war awkwardly tied to some very video gamey bullshit. I think you could have threaded that needle somehow, but Rogue Factor weren't able to quite pull it off, and so the game could feel a little tonally incongruent as you ping-pong between mass graves filled with the bodies of children and an Arthurian-inspired armory that contains a cool new sword. That isn't the only story misstep. The world's lore is very dense and very fleshed out, but it's also fairly impenetrable since a lot of it's delivered through awkwardly written puzzle clues. It references long dead deities and demonic forces and ancient orders, and it's always like, at dawn, the vigil's gaze turns ever eastward to safeguard the innocent, and that's just meant to be a clue to like turn some statue so it's facing east or something. There's a lot of this flavor text littered throughout the game, and written as it is, you start to tune out as the reliance on proper nouns combined with obvious puzzle text makes it very difficult to stay invested. There's also some smaller, more personal stories here about Remy and his family, about the journalist you're traveling with, about a priest you meet who's captured by occupying forces, about the captain of those occupying forces and what he's up to, about a doctor who's looking to weaponize demonic energy, and you just know that's going to end well. These stories are doled out in small doses, and some of them hit and some of them don't, but the overall impact of them is that Hell Is Us feels rather dense, its anthology of stories subtly unfolding as you move through it. Brass tacks though, if you're a story-focused gamer, someone who plays games for gripping, well-told stories, should you play Hell Is Us? Well, I think you should, but not for the story. Its confronting depiction of civil war is novel in that very few games dare to go that far in their rendition of violence and suffering, but putting that alongside storytelling that feels more Indiana Jones than anything else feels a little awkward, and the smaller side stories can have their moments, but they aren't enough to make the storytelling package feel complete. If you're going to play Hell Is Us, it's going to be for other things, and I would say that the most compelling reason to pick it up is its world and puzzle design, so let's take a look at that next. The biggest reason I'm recommending Hell Is Us to you today is because of all the stuff I'm about to talk about in this section, and honestly, I had no idea that any of it was coming. I saw the trailer for the game a while ago and I thought, oh cool, an edgy, sci-fi-ish, open-world, Souls-like, I'm always down for another one of those. I quickly learned though that that wasn't an accurate description of the game at all, and Rogue Factor really did keep the most compelling parts of this package completely under wraps. Hell Is Us is not an open world game. I describe it as a semi-open world game in the sense that there is a big world map that allows you to visit a number of distinct locations, and some of them are really large, But they're ultimately levels that are fully distinct from one another, linked only by that world map and some puzzles which require you to visit one zone in order to collect something used in another zone. The zones are pretty great, to be honest, and certainly at the start they have a fair amount of breadth and identity that makes them thrilling to explore. The starter zone is a simple forest, dungeon, and a set of trenches, but it smartly introduces you to how Hell Is Us manages level design, since it's all so intricate and labyrinthine, and without a zone map or a mini-map to geolocate you, and without map markers to guide you, you very quickly get used to this feeling of fumbling around in the dark, even when you can clearly see everything around you. That's the central design tenet underpinning most of the level design, I'd say. All these spaces are specifically designed to be really confusing, with lots of one-way paths and blocked off entrances that see you scurrying about like a rat in a maze. That feeling of disorientation is omnipresent during the game's entire runtime. And I suspect some people will find it frustrating. Like, this game is definitely going out of its way to confuse you and spin you in circles. Personally though, I found that really engaging because I was often unable to map these spaces in my head like I can for levels in most other games. At that point, I just surrendered to the disorientation and let my curiosity guide my exploration, and that almost always paid dividends given how densely packed this world is with secrets. In the intro, I said that Hell Is Us is a game of two halves, the first full of awe and discovery, and the second feeling a little familiar and rote. That's definitely exemplified by the level design. The second zone in particular is an incredible standout, a massive plain filled with ancient ruins, an abbey, a town under occupation, military encampments, and more. At the center of it, a mysterious, pulsating orb guarding secrets unknown, only accessible by clearing out its guardians, scattered and hidden at the far corners of the map. The first time you step into this space and begin exploring it, unassisted by a map or map markers, it feels overwhelming in the best possible way. You'll spend hours here, and they're the best hours in the entire game, hands down. Later levels struggle to hit that same high bar. Many of them are much smaller, less elaborate, fewer NPCs and fewer side quests, fewer secrets. More than anything though, it feels as though the latter part of the game is leveraged too heavily into explorable dungeons, which start to feel quite samey owing to the repetitive puzzle design and a dire lack of enemy diversity. Still, the truth is, I remain on board throughout the entire 25-hour journey because of this game's approach to NPCs, quests, quest items, puzzles, and secrets. For starters, NPCs very rarely give you specific quests. They'll say something like, oh, I'm trying to get out of this town, but I can't see how, there's no escape, I'm trapped. And then like 5 hours later, you'll find a random set of car keys in a completely different zone. And if you go back to that NPC and initiate the trade option, you can give them that set of keys, and that's going to be what they're looking for. That's what they needed to escape. It's like, you know those old point-and-click adventure games where you find an item and you have no idea what it does, then a character you meet later on mentions something and you think, hey, what about this? It's exactly what Hell Is Us is doing all the time. And that's just the side content, when the core quest is just as centered on that stuff as well. NPCs will give you directions based on a compass, or they'll tell you to look for a house in a village that has a satellite dish on it, or they'll reveal some hidden compartment within the APC that you're driving around that's been under your nose the entire time. The warning label at the front of this game, that was very, very real. And everything from where to go next to how to solve the next puzzle, it's all surfaced organically, and it requires you to pay attention, because if you don't, you're going to miss some vital clue and you'll spend the next 30 minutes spinning your wheels. The menu does provide some help in this regard, but again, you have to work for it. Rather than tell you what to do next, your journal simply tracks what you have done, allowing you to review clues and evidence so that you can make an educated guess as to what your next move should be. There's dozens of clues to find and sift through, and reading through this stuff and properly thinking about it, it is fun and satisfying, because you will make breakthroughs, and that's just so much more rewarding than selecting a quest from the list and then following the icon as you would in 90% of other games like this. I do think this self-driven, investigation-led approach to exploration stays compelling throughout the entire game length, but I don't think the same can be said of the puzzles. Best way to think about these are, imagine Resident Evil style puzzles but in a semi-open world, and imagine that instead of 10 hours of that, it's 25. There's only so many times you can give a cryptically worded clue that talks about symbols, dates, and directions before it all starts to sound a little repetitive and strained. There's only so many times you can be forced to find a specific key or keystone or missing cog or statue piece or whatever before it starts to feel pretty played out. Hell Is Us does have dungeons, a number of them in fact, and by the end you sort of groan when you see a new set of iconography appear above a statue's head because you know what's coming next. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, and I do think the first 15 hours hits a lot harder than the game's back end, but overall, I'm really into this. I do imagine what this team could have done with more time, scope, and budget. I do imagine that they could have taken these ideas further and delivered more diversity in environment and puzzle design, but what's here was more than enough to keep me engaged, and I use the word engaged very deliberately. I don't mean it in the sense that, it made me want to keep playing. I mean it in the sense that I had to pay attention, and I had to keep paying attention, otherwise I wasn't going to get anywhere. In an era where so many of these sorts of games feel like they play themselves, I was happy to be challenged by settings, quests, and puzzles that asked me to properly look at them and think about them. And as imperfect as it often was, I take this stuff any day of the week over the more common alternative. Combat in Hell Is Us is a reflection of the rest of the game. It starts out really strong, plateaus a lot in the back half of the game, but ultimately lands in a solid enough place. Hell Is Us is not a Souls-like, but its combat pacing does feel Souls-esque. It's primarily about stamina management, where attacking, dodging, and blocking all consume stamina. That naturally results in slower combat, but the kicker here is that the game utilizes something borrowed from Neo, the Key Pulse. If you're not familiar with that, it's kind of like a rhythm game sort of thing, where as you deal damage to an enemy, you get a latent charge of health and stamina, and at a certain point after you stop swinging, your character will flash, hit the right bumper at the exact moment, and you can claim that health and stamina, giving you a huge amount of momentum if you are skilled enough to maintain this timing. It incentivizes skill and aggression, since getting hit sees you lose all of that latent sustain, but if you can keep claiming it, then you can keep swinging for days. You only have a single basic melee combo to rely on for each weapon, as well as a charged heavy attack which can't be weaved into your regular combos. These things being as simple as they are, combat depth comes from your drone and rune abilities. It's a very flexible system that allows you to slot up to 4 abilities into your drone, stuff like a big plunging attack or a whirlwind attack, etc., but also 4 runes into your weapon. On the rune side, there's actually a lot to choose from, since there are 4 rune categories with dozens of unique runes to choose from, but they all adhere to a mechanical theme, like the red rage runes will displace and stun enemies, while the blue grief runes will focus on AoE attacks, and the yellow ecstasy runes will actually damage you in return for bonus damage to the enemy, further incentivizing you to nail that key pulse timing so you can keep enough sustain. Honestly, this drone and rune stuff is so good that if you were to make a sequel to Hell Is Us, you wouldn't need to add or change much of it. It's really, really good stuff. It's just very let down by the other aspects of itemization, progression, and in particular, enemy design. First of all, there's only a handful of weapon types here, and while they each have their own distinct movesets, the absence of more complex combos mean that weapons lack identity beyond the greatsword having more reach, which kind of became a go-to for that simple reason. The fact that you can craft weapons so they can take whichever rune type you prefer further reduces weapon identity. The crafting and progression stuff is one of the more disappointing aspects of the game. It's very linear, numbers go up, weapon progression. It's not like they become more interesting to use the higher level they get. It's basic, serviceable RPG light stuff where a bit more depth would have been nice. But also, I'm not sure how much of a difference it would have made given the game's biggest overall weakness, a dire lack of enemy variety. There's 2 categories of enemies in this game. The first are these white mannequin looking dudes, and there's only 4 of these, and honestly, they don't really present much of a challenge on their own. They each can play host to the game's second enemy type though, which are these big blocky mess of pixels that look suspiciously like knack. See, their mannequin hosts are invulnerable while tethered to these knack enemies, and multiple mannequins and knacks can be up and tethered to each other at the same time. Individually, these enemies don't pose much of a threat, but in aggregate, they can be a little tricky. At least at first, and this is where things start to reflect many of the game's other weaknesses. Once you've seen the 4 mannequin types and the 4 knack types, you've seen them all, and things never ever change after that. No new enemies are introduced after the first 4 or so hours of the game, and once you've learned their movesets and once you've mastered your key pulse, combat lacks both challenge and diversity. This lack of enemy variety also has profound impacts on environments, since meeting new foes is a pretty core way of making one space feel distinct from another. All 8 enemy types appear in every zone. There are 0 enemies that appear in only one specific place. Added to this, there's only really 3 actual boss encounters in the entire game, and they're more like clever remixing of the basic enemies you fight rather than actual bosses. Earlier I said that if you were to make a sequel to Hell Is Us, you wouldn't really need to touch any of the drone or rune stuff because it was great, but you would have to basically completely rethink the approach to enemy design, enemy diversity, enemy placement, and bosses, because despite some decent fundamentals that carry at some distance, combat is easily the weakest and least interesting part of what is otherwise a pretty compelling package. I've done a fair amount of nitpicking at Hell Is Us during this review, so I want to finish by contextualizing all of that. Rogue Factor. Who's heard of that studio before? Very few people, I'd wager. And yet here they are busting out with a new IP, something that's very risky this day and age. They've made a game that'll run you at least 25 hours and closer to 35 if you're a completionist. It looks stunning with some really striking art design. It runs flawlessly, at least it did for me on a high-end PC, and I've heard reports that console ports are equally excellent. It's a AA game that has a near AAA feel, but they aren't charging $80 for this. Hell, they aren't charging $70 or $60. This is a $50 title, and damn if it isn't worth every penny of that and then some. Hell Is Us is an incredibly ambitious game in the sheer breadth of its offering. It's got cutscenes and story and NPC dialogue and mysteries to solve and dozens of locations to explore. It's got a lot of stuff, so much stuff, that I doubt anyone will walk away from this feeling shortchanged by what Rogue Factor are offering. Yeah, it's got some problems in the sense that the team probably bit off more than they could chew, and rather than accept their limitations, they sought to compensate for them by way of quantity rather than quality. But on balance, I just can't be mad about that because it's clear how much this team wanted to put it all on the line and over-deliver. But the most important part of this whole package, by far, is that it's another stark reminder of how compelling these sorts of games can become when you rip out all of the signposts and just let players figure it out for themselves. Had Hell Is Us adopted all of that lazy, hand-holdy bullshit, I probably would have still ended up recommending this because there's plenty of good stuff here, but it'd be a pretty half-hearted recommendation. Whereas now, I'm really going to bat for this one. I love what this team was aiming at, I love a lot of what they've achieved, and I desperately hope they get another swing at this because I'd love to see how much further they could take this formula. That's a question for tomorrow though, but I'll say today, Hell Is Us is absolutely worth checking out, so I recommend it to you. You'll have noticed that we just launched a website, thisweekinvideogames.com. There are lots of different ways to build a website, lots of platforms and tools and companies that'll do it for you. But here's the bottom line. The overwhelming majority of people who might need a website for their work, their personal brand, or their hobby, they don't need all of that complexity. They just need an intuitive, reliable tool that lets them build a great looking website with ease, and that's exactly what this video sponsor, Squarespace, lets you do. Squarespace lets you build professional looking websites in minutes. You just select from their extensive list of pre-built templates, customize those templates to your design, and boom, you're in business. It really is that easy. Squarespace's intuitive tools and huge library of templates makes it super easy to get started. If you can handle formatting a Word document or a PowerPoint slide, then you are already well and truly equipped to make a fantastic looking website through Squarespace. Once it's live and your content starts going up, Squarespace has all sorts of back-end tools to help you track and grow your site. Detailed analytics tools showcase what your audience is clicking on, and SEO tools and social media integration make it easier for your audience to find you. There's even advanced AI tools baked right into the workflow, giving you help with things like copywriting and proofreading. It's an easy-to-use end-to-end solution that could change your life, to be honest. A website is one of the best ways to get yourself or your business out there. It's why we started thisweekinvideogames.com, and so if you're thinking about kicking off something new, either personally or professionally, a website is certainly going to be a great step in that process. If you want to get started, then visit squarespace.com to start building your website through their free trial, and if you want to get serious, use offer code SKILLUP to get 10% off your purchase of a website or a domain name. Thanks very much to Squarespace for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.